Calibrated Blast is a powerful Magic the Gathering card. For 3 mana, reveal the top card from your library until you reveal a non-land card. Put it onto the bottom of your library and deal damage equal to that card's converted mana cost to any target. And it also has flashback. This means if Shadow of Mortality is on top of our deck, we will deal 15 damage to any target, and the way we do it is very consistent. Witch's Cottage lets us put a creature from our graveyard on top of our library. So if we can discard or get Shadow of Mortality into our graveyard, we can then use any fetch land to get Witch's Cottage to put it on top of our deck. Now our Calibrated Blast is guaranteed to hit a 15 converted mana cost card. This deck was designed by Aspiring Spike, and many people in the comments and my Discord have been telling me to play it because he 5-0'd a tournament with the deck. This strategy is very powerful, and if you doubt it, I will prove you wrong in this video, and as always there's a cyber guide for this deck up on my Patreon. To start the first round, we're on the play and have a very good opening hand. A card I want to highlight is Sign of Draco. This card is generally played in Modern in 5 color decks because you can reduce the cost down to 2 mana and cast it on turn 2. Now Witch's Cottage requires us to always have swamps in play, so we can't play any non-swamps to make Sign of Draco cost 2 mana on turn 2, so we're playing it more in this deck because of the mana value being 12. The game starts off slowly with me and my opponent just hitting our land drops on turn 1 and 2, and after they play an Otawara and go to our upkeep, they use an Ice to tap our Triumph to try and screw us on mana. This shows us that they're on team or Rhinos. With no way to cast a spell in our hand, we gotta hold up Lightning Bolt, and when I try to fetch a Triumph on their end step, they put 2 4/4 Rhinos into play. Being in an awkward spot, I fetch a Triumph, and we're gonna have to play this season Pyromancer. As they only have 8 power on the board and we are in an explosive deck, I'm not too scared of these Rhinos, especially with a Fury in hand being able to kill one of them. My general game plan from here is I was hoping to hardcast the Fury next turn so that we can both kill a Rhino and either present a way to trade with one, or maybe try to Lightning Bolt one or something like this. I do shock in the Blood Crypt because I don't want to use my Verdant Catacombs to cast this Lightning Bolt, as I still want to have access to a Witch's Cottage if need be. But things don't look too good for us when the opponent casts a Bloodbraid Elf and that cascades into a Teferi Time Raveler. Now I can't really bolt a Rhino here because then they just won't attack with it, as well as they're probably going to bounce one of my blockers. Pretty awkward. Now the opponent decides to bounce nothing and just attacks in with their whole team. Remember about Teferi Time Raveler's static ability, I can't do anything in their combat step, so I'm just going to trade with the Bloodbraid Elf and see what we draw. The opponent bounces our token, and after we draw a Calibrated Blast, I'm feeling quite hopeless and I'm going to concede this game. I'm just kidding, come on, this is lethal. We can get Witch's Cottage from the Verdant Catacombs, put the Sign of Draco on top of our deck, that's 12 damage. We can cast the Calibrated Blast, deal 12 damage to the opponent's face, and then use this Lightning Bolt to finish up the job. It's actually quite lucky that the opponent had Teferi Time Raveler, because maybe I would have used the Lightning Bolt in combat. Going into boarding, I bring in 4 Sweepers, Chalice, and Thoughtseize for the clunky removal and slow cantrips. Quickly before game 2, if you do enjoy this content and want to support me, consider clicking that subscribe button. It helps out a lot and over 70% of you aren't subscribed. And sideboarding pays off. In game 2, our opening hand is Fury, 2 Path of Peril, and 2 Shadow Prophecy. While Shadow Prophecy isn't the best in this matchup, Path of Peril will definitely buy us a lot of time. After a load of nothing happening on the early turns, the opponent finally plays a Shardless Agent on turn 3, cascading into a Crashing Footfalls and putting 10 power on the board. But with 3 Path of Peril in hand, I think it's quite easy to see what play I'm going to make. Now we do leave the opponent with the 2/2 Shardless Agent as its converted mana cost is 3, but having only 2 power on the board compared to 10, I'm pretty happy with that. The opponent suspends another Crashing Footfalls and attacks in for 2. With a Witch's Cottage off the top, the best play here is to set up for this Shadow Prophecy. A suspend counter comes off the Crashing Footfalls, they attack me in for 2, and then just say go. So I'm going to Shadow Prophecy on the end step, and it does resolve. And what's even better is it finds a Thoughtseize and a Calibrated Blast with 2 Shadow of Mortality to go to the graveyard. With a Witch's Cottage in hand, we now have a very explosive turn. Starting off with a Thoughtseize, the opponent's hand is full of creature removal and a Mystical Dispute. So let's take the Mystical Dispute and fire off the Calibrated Blast now when we know the opponent doesn't have a counterspell, as well as we know they don't have Rhinos to put on our end step. After passing back the turn, they remove a suspend counter from the Crashing Footfalls, attack me in for 2, and then just say go. Now don't forget Calibrated Blast has flashback, and this Bloodstained Mire off the top guarantees a win because on their upkeep we can fetch Witch's Cottage, put the other Shadow of Mortality on top of the deck, and flashback the Calibrated Blast. Now of course they could have had counter, but they didn't here. And if I didn't draw this Bloodstained Mire, I still would have cast the Calibrated Blast, because we would only have to hit a card with 3 CMC off the top of the deck, and we only play a couple Thoughtseize and Bolts. Starting the next round, we have a great opening hand with Thoughtseize and a load of spells that we want to cast in this deck. The opponent starts off with a Hedron Crab, showing that they're on mill, and that's actually good for us. Don't forget, Calibrated Blast not only has flashback, but we want the Shadow of Mortality in our graveyard, and we see that their hand is even weaker when they have no second land. Now I do think for a while if I want to take the Visions of Beyond, because maybe we could mana screw them, but if the opponent top decks a fetch land, and I don't take this Drown in the Lock, then I will be incredibly screwed. So I'm going to take the Drown in the Lock and reduce the opponent's interaction. After passing back, the opponent quickly plays a second Crab and passes back the turn. We draw a Sign of Draco, so the best thing we can do is play our land and start setting up for both a 2-mana Leyline Binding, and also trying to cast this Shadow Prophecy. After the opponent uses Visions of Beyond, yet again they miss their second land drop, and we find a Lightning Bolt off the top of the deck. Now something important here, no matter what removal spell I use, you should always exile the Ruin Crab, because the Hedron Crab has 2 toughness, the Ruin Crab has 3 toughness, and we have Fury in the deck, so if the opponent plays a second Hedron Crab, and we find a Fury, we're going to blow them out. Wait a second. With a Swamp off the top, we can now Shadow Prophecy, and if we find a Fury, we basically win the game. For once in my life, finally playing tight actually comes up, and we are rewarded for making sure we kill the right things. I guess this was trivial, but funny that this actually played out like it did. Rightfully so, the opponent decides that that's enough and they concede the game, so let's move on to sideboarding. Going into boarding, we want to take out a load of clunky draw spells, and I do take out a lot of Shadow of Immortality because the opponent's going to be milling us a lot, so we don't need a lot of them in our deck to put it into the graveyard. We put in 4 Dauthi Voidwalker, an Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, a Thoughtseize. I think you can all see where this match is going to go. After keeping a great opening hand, the opponent starts with a Ruin Crab, and finding a Lightning Bolt off the top, we're going to use one, and they have an Archive Trap. For the rest of the game, we're just praying to hit the Emrakul the Aeon's Torn to win, so eventually when we do, we will. Maybe the opponent will have Surgical Extraction, but I'm sure we'll be fine. After finding another Leyline Binding, I start off the second turn with a Thoughtseize, and they cycle a Fractured Sanity in response. Here we're going to take the Tash's Hideous Laughter, as they have 2 other Jace in hand. Now we can pass, trying to work towards just hitting that Emrakul, and the opponent follows up their turn 3 by completing and casting a Jace. They do decide to mill us, we don't find the Emrakul still, and we find a Chalice of the Void off the top, so I'm going to follow up with a Dauthi Voidwalker. After playing our land and passing the turn, the opponent uses Field of Ruin on one of our Triumphs, we get the Swamp out of our deck, and we finally hit the Emrakul, essentially locking up the game, because the opponent does not have a Surgical Extraction. From here, there wasn't much else they could do. They did continue to mill us, but because we could kill the Jace, cast the Chalice on one, and then steal the Jace the Mind Sculptor, it was looking quite trivial for us to win. I decided to go for the mill plan against the mill deck. I really did want to win with mill with Jace the Mind Sculptor, but after the opponent continued to mill me, I was able to get Witch's Cottage from our graveyard with a Shadow of Mortality to put that on top, flash back the Calibrated Blast, and deal 15 damage to their face. I started off this tournament really well at 3 wins and 0 losses. In the next round, I won game 3 against a blue-white artifacts deck just because we could outgrind them with Fury, Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, and attacking with Sign of Draco. Things didn't go too well in the next round though, despite being able to crush Merfolk in the second game with a Lightning Bolt and a Calibrated Blast. In the third game, they had a well-timed Force of Negation and Subtlety to prevent me from winning the game. Then in the final round, we managed to beat Amulet Titan in the second game quite smoothly. We lost game 1 because we had to keep a weak opening hand not knowing the matchup. But then in the third game, the opponent had a turn 2 kill, missed lethal, and then we still couldn't finish them off, even though we might have been able to win if we just had a few different cards. Overall, I managed to finish with 3 wins and 2 losses, with both losses feeling like they would have been winnable if things went differently my way, but overall, I thought this deck was amazing. As always, if you did enjoy this content, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you to all of my Patreons, and check out this video because YouTube thinks you'll like it.